Hey everyone, welcome back to Business is Fucking Hard. Today I'm sitting down with Jon Bennest, VP of Product at Zonda Urban, and someone who spent the last 20 years quietly shaping how real estate developers make smarter, faster decisions through data. We talk about building without investors, the trade-offs between growth and control, and what it's like to go from scrappy entrepreneur to working inside a much bigger machine. And we get into the evolution of the real estate data space, from a world where nobody trusted numbers to one where everybody's fighting for more. Let's get into it.
Hi there, I'm Trevor Koot, and this is Business is Fucking Hard, the podcast where business owners pull back the curtain and talk about the realities of owning a business. We'll hear their stories, learn some lessons, and have some fun along the way. Thanks for joining us. Jon Bennest, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me today, Trevor. Really appreciate being here.
Absolutely. I've said before, my world now is very real estate focused. Anybody that listens to this knows kind of somewhat my background and 20 years in the real estate industry in various capacities. But what I've tried to do is just not have it a real estate focused podcast, bringing on guests who are just from the real estate industry or representative of. And I think your story is going to be really interesting because it's kind of a technology story, but real estate adjacent. So looking forward to unpacking that. Yours and my paths have crossed a couple of times now. We've intentionally visited, but we have been at the same meetings and that kind of thing. So interested to dive into your business story and unpack your journey. And as I do with all the guests, Jon, let's start with what your introduction to business and entrepreneurship was.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Thanks, Trevor, and appreciate the background. My introduction to business was just straight up getting a job right off the bat for a residential real estate developer in the Vancouver, BC market, Polygon Homes, which is one of the largest residential construction new home builders in Western Canada. And my job, I started in 2005, kind of like at the precipice of when technology was starting to take off. My job was just kind of very low level at the time as a market research analyst. But, in terms of the exposure that I got was really, really cool from the perspective that you got to be basically the ears and the eyes of the developer. And you could basically, your job was to sleuth around to all of these actively selling pre-sale condo and townhome projects in the region. Shake hands with the sales managers, get as much information as you could. Be nice to them, make friends, and then kind of report back your findings to the senior leadership. So, a big part of my introduction in real estate wasn't technology at all. It was just me. They said go to a 7-Eleven. We have this magazine that's for free called the New Home Buyer's Guide. You go pick up the New Home Buyer's Guide, grab a Slurpee, open it up, and then find the 20 projects you're going to visit for the day. Talk to people, take pictures, and then go back to your office and just hammer out all the information that's important that we want to know. And your job is to kind of be the maintenance and recording person of the company for all of the region of where they're doing business. So I kind of got into that process as a market research analyst, and it was an interesting experience from the perspective that there's hundreds and hundreds of projects and only a certain amount of hours in the day to do your work. And from somebody who had not really a lot of business experience right off the bat, I was just finding myself like super overwhelmed with the amount of work that needed to be done. And it was like, really kind of big deep dive into the working life, working weekends, trying to just keep up, that sort of thing. And, I don't know if this had any inspiration for the future, but at the back of my mind, I thought to myself, like, I would love to, just have this available at my fingertips, this information rather than having to drive out everywhere would be great. Even little things as well too. Like we didn't have, Google Earth I don't think it was a thing in 2005 yet. Smartphones were not there yet. We just had Blackberries at the time. So even just kind of going, from two different places, you'd have to drive. You can't just check out Google Earth, that sort of thing. So I worked there for a couple of years. Learned a lot of amazing lessons, amazing company. I worked for another residential developer, Mosaic Homes, which another We're a top-notch, top-class residential developer in the Metro Vancouver region. Learned a lot about business strategy. They used to use Rockefeller Habits as their kind of go-to kind of North Star for how they operate and run a business, which is a really phenomenal approach. Done really well. And then parlayed that into working in the consulting of real estate and advisory services. And at that time, that was around 2010, I partnered up with a man named Michael Ferreira, who owned a company, Urban Analytics. Around 2010, we became business partners and basically grew Urban Analytics as a real estate advisory services firm, where we would, provide strategic advice on product mix. What's the optimal condo unit size, unit mix, price point? Who are your buyers? We would put together analysis and studies for those clients, and then they would kind of take a look at it, and they would take that and give it to their architects to design the optimal building for any respective site that they were looking at. So that was a big component of our business. And then we kind of decided at a certain point we wanted to more expand into helping people with just beyond the recommendations on a site by site basis, like how can they help? We help them make good decisions with their real estate through the data. And when I was working in my first job at Polygon, they had the benefit being a larger company to afford a market research analyst. But back in 2005, there weren't a lot of companies that had market research analysts. They kind of had to rely on their gut. They had to rely on their broker, their person in the know to kind of give them the information or that kind of knowledge that they would feel confident in making a decision on buying a site or launching at a certain price. So, we decided to kind of, expand our business beyond the advisory services into a data subscription offering. And we would, in a sense, do a lot of the work that I would do initially as a market research analyst when I first started my job.
Right.
We hired a team of market research analysts, compiled that information into a proprietary database, and then sold subscription access to residential development industry stakeholders. So, what was cool about it is that, not all of the developers and development industry stakeholders can afford these market research analysts, but they could maybe afford a subscription to help them out and make better decisions. So, all those things and the tools that I didn't necessarily have access to as a market research analyst. You fast forward to today in 2025, most developers actually have their market research analysts, but they're doing a hybrid of things. They're going to sites that are most relevant to them to kind of get insight on those projects, but then they're also leveraging the data platforms and using it. And beyond just project level data, they're also using the tools to be like, okay, let's take a look at more of a macro basis. Which areas should we be investing in based on the macro and aggregate data? Which areas should we be avoided based on potential oversupply or that kind of thing. So they're using the data and they're kind of leveraging it to kind of do macro and micro decisions, things that they didn't have access to 20 years ago, that they would have to hire a full-time in-house person for. So that's kind of where we came. And then, when we grew the business, expanded out to Calgary, Edmonton, around 2014 to 2015 is when we started to see a shift in new purpose-built rental construction. It started to become more of a growing trend. We had a lot of our clients come to us and say, hey, can you do advisory study on this new rental we're considering? And so, we started to obviously observe that trend and added that as a portfolio of offering to our platform. And now I would say rentals is a huge component of new home construction across Canada and in our platform. And then in 2021, we were acquired by a U.S. firm, Zonda Home, and we've now since been rebranded to Zonda Urban, Zonda Home Canada, and we've expanded our services to Eastern Canada and all tertiary markets outside of 300,000 people or larger. We now track across Canada. So, in terms of the data coverage in new construction, I would imagine we're the largest kind of new home construction data provider in Canada, as referenced by number of projects we're collecting data on. So that's kind of where we're at today. Tried to keep it as brief as I could. But.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that kind of transition from the personal business perspective, related to like what was your situation and how were you comfortable to make the decision to kind of branch out and own a business?
Yeah, so that is kind of a really interesting question. And, what I find, or what I found, at least in my experience, was that what I once thought of in a period of my life was a negative, I now, upon reflection,
Right.
look at it as a positive. And I'll kind of explain, like, when I was working for residential developers, my role in itself was, kind of a tertiary role. It wasn't a core function of their business. So as a result of that, there's only a specific amount of compensation kind of allocated for those types of roles. In kind of a roundabout way, I'm saying, like, I wasn't really paid extensively high in those particular roles, and I had a certain degree of ambition. Being 5 or 6 years into my career, I think that was kind of the big part of the struggle, was that I was like, okay, where am I going to break through in my career?
Right.
Where am I going to see this next big kind of explosion? And it just wasn't happening. And so just when I had the fortune of partnering up with, my business partner at that time, I wasn't making a lot. I was young, single, living in a really low rent apartment. Not that there's anything wrong with low rent, but it was, I tried to find the most affordable kind of situation I could. And then when I jumped into the business, I, asked for, in terms of any type of payment, got my parents for a loan, that kind of situation to help with any type of situation around that. But that was kind of an interesting thing in hindsight, because what ultimately ended up happening is we did a slow growth model where we weren't taking any type of external investors beyond that. And it was just the two of us
Right.
as co-owners of the company. And we were, like, doing the best we could to grow the company. And then we took the profits each year, and then we hired a new person. And then year three, okay, this is where we want to start moving into, what we say, get off the advisory or consulting treadmill, where we want to have a more reoccurring part of revenue as part of our business to add value. But all of it was slow growth, and we were paying ourselves fairly, like, modest to low salaries. And at the time, it was a struggle mentally, because you obviously want to get paid as much as possible. So it's hard, but eventually every year we kept taking the profits and then reinvesting it in more. And eventually, when we got to the platform component, where we had a reoccurring subscription and we had that revenue coming in, that's where we really started to take off and started to kind of take it to a next level. And in hindsight, I don't think, if I was in a situation where I was getting paid a lot of money, that I would have done it. So when people say, when, the entrepreneurship route, like, oh, like, what type of courage, or they use words that are, like, very appropriate. But for me, it was like, I didn't really feel courageous, because I was literally getting paid the same, if not more, than I was previously. And so in hindsight, I was not, like, wanting to get paid more. But I think it's harder when you're getting paid a lot to go into those situations, when you go from getting paid a lot to nothing, versus where I was getting paid, like, a lower end, to then kind of growing it out that way. And then also, like, the benefit of that is we also had a business where we had two of us as owners of the shares of the company. And, when it's time to sell, it's a lot more simplified process. There's just two owners. The price is the price. You're only dealing with two people, versus, have a lot of companies out there where, you take seed capital, and then you entertain outside investors. And then all of a sudden you've sunk 5 or 6 or 7+ million dollars into a venture, where who knows what the true value of the company is, and then it gets really complicated in that regard. So a lot of the negatives, again, went back to, like, fast forward to getting to the company to a point where we felt good about selling it and the valuation. We didn't have any complications or outside investors because of those negatives at the very beginning. In terms of my situation, I now have two young kids, a 3.5-year-old and 2-year-old, and I used to think life was hard, trying to manage work and social life,
Yeah.
and now I'm like, wow, I will give it up for anyone who can start a business with two little kids, or single parents, or anything like that. So definitely, also being single and not having kids was definitely also, in hindsight, an amazing time to get into that space.
On the transition into the business, you said it was kind of a slow growth. what I'm curious about is, was that strategy intentional? Was the slow growth actually because you wanted to see an outcome where you didn't have investors kind of pulling some of the strings, or influencing some of that that eventual payout that you might have or might not have been looking at? Or was it because the only opportunity based on business and kind of opportunity out there was limiting the amount of growth that you could do?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't want to give myself enough credit to think that I had that type of foresight when I was
Yeah.
getting into it.
Okay.
I
No, this is
probably
great though,
didn't.
because this is the
Yeah,
type of thing, like people look at those, at, the business path. They don't have all those details, and they think, oh, that was really smart for them to do that. And then you read a book about the biggest businesses, Nike or Pixar or whatever, and they're guessing as much along the way as a small business owner. They just happen to make it.
totally. Yeah, no, and I even heard, so I read the Shoe Dog book, and even like learning about Nike, and just that most of the time in the first, probably, what is it, 5+ years, he wasn't even working full time on Nike. He was working doing accounting, and then at nighttime would be working on Nike, kind of thing, right? So yeah, everyone's kind of just got a path and goes certain ways. So yeah, no, and if I'm being fully honest about it, we didn't really have any specific reason or rationale behind the slow growth. I think we just kind of just said, okay, let's just show up and get to work and see what we can do, and then start to make this. We start to make some money. Let's start to take that money and make decisions with it that we think will be a good investment for the business in the future. But yeah, I would also kind of think of it from the perspective of being be realistic about where you want to land and how big of a business you want to create, as it relates to that type of consideration for investment. If you think your business is going to be $1 billion business, and there's companies out there that might beat you to it, that are out there in some other part of the world, then by all means, it makes tons of sense to, and you found a model that works for you, by all means, it makes tons of sense to kind of get investors, get to the market, and get out and expand and grow as quickly as possible. Because somebody might beat you to the punch, so that makes sense. And you dilute your shares, and you may have 5% of $1 billion company is a lot in the end. But I think the challenge that I think some businesses out there they do is they get caught up in the perception of, oh well, seed rounds or growing is a good thing, but they end up finding out that they've taken all this investment dollars in, they have a lower control of the company, and they have a lower percentage ownership of the company, only to realize that it was really only a couple $1 million company. So being realistic about where you think your company is in terms of its mature size and consideration, I think is really important. And so maybe, and I don't know, maybe this is limiting for me as a human, but I kind of figured, I'm like, well, this type of business, like this is probably where this is the kind of size in our market in Canada for this type of business. And so if you were to take on investment beyond here in any crazy capacity, like what are you really getting? Like being 5% owner of Coca-Cola is great, but being 5% owner of a laundromat may not, of one store, may not be as great. So kind of understanding that, I think, is important. And so maybe that goes back down to kind of my thought process a little bit on a subconscious level, that this is probably the kind of the size of this business as it relates to just being in Canada only.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. I mean, I think everybody goes into business kind of with the dream, or the maybe fantasy even, that it's going to grow into something really big, like however that looks. And then as you start going, you realize, obviously time allows you to have better perspective. Experience allows you to be more wise. And you start to make different decisions, where originally there might have been franchising opportunities or whatever, strategic growth opportunities. All of a sudden you're thinking, yeah, but this one operation is working really well. And I've had a few guests that have talked like that, like when they started contemplating, a second location or growth, it's like, yeah, but what are we losing in order to accommodate that? Right. So, um, so, tell me about the partnership going in, and kind of the breakdown in responsibilities. You didn't have, by the sounds of it, you didn't have any staff right out of the gate. How did you grow and kind of delineate who was kind of running operations and who was strategic and that kind of thing?
Yeah. So, I would love to say that we were very kind of, by the book and had a delineated kind of set of tasks. But that wasn't the case. It was just more, kind of, getting into it and kind of determining, kind of just like more of an exercise of, what are within each individual, like between myself and my business partner, what are the tasks that you enjoy doing and what you find are most valuable in terms of what you bring, and kind of delineating it from there. My business partner had a previous experience working for developers, and also having the business run for, over a decade at that point. Had a lot of respect and a lot of relationships in the real estate industry. So naturally, it would make sense for, as we grew the business, for my business partner to be the face as it related to, any type of media coverage, talking with clients and meetings, that sort of thing. And I would focus on kind of the day to day, working on advisory studies, working on the research processes. If we start to build a website, just making sure that we're on top of the technical aspects of building out the website. So kind of more being like the technical consideration for things. But I think what was found was interesting was that, some of the deficiencies that I had going into the partnership, and vice versa, we both kind of started to improve. One was strong maybe, or one was weak. We both started to improve in both
Right.
regards. And towards the end of, we worked together for over 10 years before we sold, we kind of found ourselves being fairly like improved at the areas we were previously deficient at. And so I thought that was a really cool experience. And then we got to a point where like we're kind of doing the same stuff now, because we're
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
we
yeah.
like all of it, and we're doing it. So it was actually kind of really cool. We all the things that maybe I was deficient in and I lacked when I first started, and I got better at. And I like even little things, even things like getting out there and being client facing, and being kind of more of a leadership position is not something I'm uncomfortable with. Versus maybe when I first started, when I was 27, might have been a little bit more challenging for me to consider, especially in a world where experience is really important. Having 40 to 60-year-old clients, and you're a 27-year-old, like it's a little bit harder to convince them to like take a $10 million site and do this and that with it than you are if you've got more experience, right? So now I've got a little bit of both. My business partner's got a little bit of got everything, and we're kind of both better off for the experience, and we're still friends today. So yeah, so not very sophisticated operation, but as we grew, started to add on staff that could help us out with those components of it. I think that was a huge thing. Like even having an administrative staff help us out with things like that is kind of understated, but a huge benefit to the day to day operations.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, this is it's certainly a trend. The word I've been using is red thread through all of these episodes and all of the conversations I'm having, because this idea that you you can go and take business in school, get a business degree, but you're not going to learn about all the things that you learn by doing business. And that learning curve is extremely steep, and it was for both you and your partner. But then you quickly figure out where those strengths are in each other, but then you're learning from each other during that process as well. And then the other piece is surrounding yourself with good people. So I want to talk about kind of that growth path, but just on the surrounding yourself with good people. You didn't have investors. Sometimes the thing that investors bring is added knowledge or experience or guidance when you're up against a business decision or a strategic decision. So in the absence of that, did you have like dedicated mentors or an advisory board or anything that was helping guide you on kind of both business and kind of internal like actual deliverables decisions?
Yeah, so we did not, in terms of an advisory board. Luckily, still maintained a lot of relationships with people at my former
Right.
employer, and just even clients in the industry. Like the real estate development industry is super interesting in that some of the people at the top are some of the more successful people around. So even having clients that you can kind of meet up with for lunches, coffees, that sort of thing, they're clients, but they're also kind of a sounding board for you as well too. And they're already kind of, a lot of them are in successful components of their life. So whenever you meet up with them, they're more than happy to offer kind of guidance or suggestions as to how they think your business is going and how they have suggestions for running your business. We didn't have any advisory board in hindsight. Like, I think it would have been a decent idea to have that sort of kind of involvement with third party stakeholders. I guess I could say we were fortunate in that without that, we still managed to consistently grow and good things happen to us. But for those who are considering it, I don't think that because we didn't have it, it's something you don't shouldn't consider yourself as well too.
Yeah. Yeah. What was that growth path looking like? Like you talked about kind of the admin team and that support team. You indicated earlier, kind of that first hire and then three. But what was that growth? Kind of length of time and what did that all look like?
Yeah. So over the course of uh, 8 years, we grew probably from a team of 2 to 3, upwards of 15 and high as 20
Okay.
staff, probably kind of in the 15 plus territory towards the end of the transaction of the company. And I would say the first thing that we wanted to do was just make sure that we could get a handle of the day to day operations, and we found that for us, the research component was the kind of core part of our offering. So our first hires were in the research capacity. So in terms of the majority of where our hires and our growth were is it was in the research side. In the end, probably about half of the team members were on research. We outsourced accounting firms, so we didn't have any in-house accountants. And then same thing for legal. And then we started to kind of as we got to a larger size, probably about, trying to do the napkin math, 7 or 8 years in, that's when we started to like, hey, you know what, we should get administrative staff, people to deal with more technical items. And I think that's the thing that a lot of bigger companies do get the benefit of, is that there's a lot of
Yeah.
roles that you can, as a smaller company, really kind of take on. And that's where, for startup entrepreneurs, it's where like a lot of the extra hours is because it doesn't really make sense to hire a full-time person to do a lot of different types of tasks. So you end up having to do that yourself. So as you get to a certain revenue part, it starts to get easier from that perspective. You can start hiring admin people, even HR or anything like that starts to get a little bit easier. So yeah, so it's kind of been, that's, if that kind of explains kind of where we kind of grew. And
Absolutely.
then yeah, and I think the most interesting thing since the acquisition has been just a real good focus on sales as part of the process as well too. And we did hire a salesperson about a year prior to the acquisition, but now post acquisition, the company is based out of the U.S. The sales component of the team is super strong. The sales systems that they have in place are very strong, and to me, like that, even just seeing it kind of secondhand, what a good sales and marketing team brings to the table.
Can do.
If I were to
Yeah.
do it over again, I would definitely fast track that role relative to potentially others as part of the process, through just kind of osmosis of learning through this acquisition.
It's interesting, your comments about small business, small medium sized business having access to some of those other features that larger businesses have access to, and I mean that happens through evolution. You internalize some of the things that you were using external sources for, the accounting, the legal, that kind of thing. But I'm curious, as we move in this gig economy, how much of that will actually benefit small and medium-sized business owners as opposed to disrupt them, like create opportunity for kind of just picking things that can actually benefit you and your operations internally, so that you can focus on what you're doing. Like the best thing for you to do was to focus on getting the clients, figuring out what their needs are, developing a solution for their needs, and then delivering that data in a nice packaged format so that they can make better decisions on their end. what are all the kind of services that you can bring in to just allow the company to do that? And I wonder if the gig economy will kind of streamline some of that for small business.
100%. Not only the gig economy, but just technology in
Yeah, sure.
general, I
Yeah.
would argue is just smashing barriers to entry into business for solo entrepreneurs, smaller groups. And I'll give you an example. Our website, what we created in 2010, we're talking, you can pay $10,000, $30,000, maybe even more for a good quality website. My wife started a bookkeeping company a year ago and used GoDaddy Arrow for her website and paid $50. And it's a pretty, like, it's not, obviously, it's not as good as the $30,000 one that we paid for, but it's pretty good. And so, like, just from even a bookkeeping perspective, it's like, okay, you wanted to start a business 10, 15 years ago, you look at the costs and you lay them out and you're like, well, that's like 30K of upfront costs that a lot of people got to pay that, nowadays, you're like, oh, I don't have, like professional photos done, and my wife's searching for, oh, there's an AI company that takes a couple of photos for you and then like curates a professional photo for $70, so that the costs of like all of those things are going to, on multiple levels, are going to continue to go down and decrease those barriers to entry. So that also translates into like the things that we were talking about. Like, are there solutions for legal? Are there solutions for accounting? Are there solutions for all aspects of your business journey? I 100% believe that that is a possibility and is unlocks kind of that barriers to entry. Sales and marketing. Look at LinkedIn. Look at any type of platform that you may want to use, depending on what your customer base is. If it's Instagram, there's all these things that are just blowing away all barriers to entry. So I think it's really good for people who are looking to be solopreneurs. Like, I think it's never been an easier time to do it. And you look at technology and where it's going, it gets even more like interesting. From the perspective of even just building a website. 15 years ago, who knows how much it would have cost you, like 300,000, 500,000 more to build like just a bare, like a website that does this functionality. You fast forward to today and maybe it costs a fraction of that. And then maybe 10 years from now, you have some, either vibe coding or some type of thing where you just dictate, hey, I'd like this website to do this.
And it just
What
creates,
is the
yeah.
cost of that going to be? So yeah, so I find it super interesting. I'm excited to see where technology is going to lead us and kind of what it will unlock. But for people who have ambition, I think that it seems like a really good time to take advantage of like the lower barriers to entry.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree. And then even from that scaling perspective, like even for small business, don't be so scared of it. Make sure that there's some aspects that you embrace and look at where are the opportunities for efficiency and how can I leverage this for scale, right? So speaking of that, you walk through kind of that 8 years in that kind of continuum. At what point did exit start to enter the conversation? Was it as soon as like right at the end of the 8 years when you exited and somebody just happened to approach you? Or was there more talk about scaling? What does the future of this business look like? And then for the last couple of years, you kind of had, let's find somebody to acquire.
Yeah. So for us in our business model is kind of a hybrid of technology and kind of boots on the ground research capacity. So, where we're located in our head office in Vancouver, a large part of our staff do primary research. So in order to expand, it's not just like a pure play software platform where if you build a great software platform, you in theory could just expand to Australia or
Right.
Toronto or that sort of thing just by waving a wand and being in that market and hiring kind of admin and salespeople. We still had that kind of human component where you would have to hire full time people and pay them to do the research capacity. So that's kind of where there is that cost consideration for expansion. We had a really good footing in Western Canada, and there's a couple of players who do what we do in Eastern Canada as well too. So we're kind of aware that there would be a competitive situation with cost outlay. So at that point, we weren't looking to exit by any means, but at the same time, we were aware that okay, you have to make a decision. You've done a great job of expanding and growing your presence in a specific geographic location, and then in order to take the next step and take on another location, here's what the cost is going to look like. So it was kind of for us to kind of decide whether here's your kind of options. You can take on new partners. You can put all of your profits into this expansion effort, and then maybe give yourself a pay cut for the next couple of years.
Right.
With the end goal, like realistically, one of the end goals with us too would be to be North America wide in terms of the data coverage. So just to kind of reiterate back to what we cover in terms of data, it's new multifamily for sale product. So that's kind of more urban focused. It's new condos and townhomes. There's a lot of the company that acquired us, Zonda, is the largest actual residential data provider in the US. But its kind of core business is single family. So there's not really a good, to my knowledge, source of kind of condo and townhome data collection company out in the US. So if it was a goal of ours to eventually be in North America wide with this specific coverage, you would have to kind of either then think of what is the capital that's going to go into expanding into North America, and who would you be competing against? It just so happened that the CEO of Zonda was actually born in North Vancouver and came to visit us occasionally as a function of family, and so we got to meet him through that, and yeah, we just over the years had conversations here and then, and he said you guys would be a great piece of adding an urban component to our platform, and so if you are going to sell, you want to make sure that the price is right, the terms are right, and that the company that's acquiring you could potentially put you in a position that could allow you to do more than you would have previously on your own. And so if you are going to get acquired, it's also important to kind of think of that consideration as well too. We have expanded all throughout Eastern Canada now. We haven't expanded into the US yet at this point, but it is something that is on the roadmap to get down there. And yeah, it's nice to be acquired by a company that at least has plans to fulfill what your vision was for where it's going to go. So I think it was kind of more of a situation of all of the kind of ducks were in the right row. And I don't know if it's necessarily the case for all businesses where that occurs, but it's kind of like you look at somebody who says, I want to buy you, and here's the terms and here's the price. You kind of also look at what are your alternatives, who are your other potential buyers. Being real with yourself and saying, like, are there 100 different types of buyers for us at the best price? Are there 3? Are there 5? And so you kind of put all those factors and you combine them together when you're making a decision. I think that the fewer number of potential buyers that you have, then the more you have to kind of strongly consider the offers that come your way, unless you don't plan on selling ever.
Right. And was that a big factor for you? Like you got the offer, obviously the conversation was kind of over time, but then did you go out to market and say, okay, we'll see what else somebody's going to do in order to ensure that they're being fair or there's not a higher demand?
Yeah, we did not take the company to the market. I think the way we handled the situation from the acquisition perspective is that we kept working, we kept growing, and they would approach us with an offer. And if it's something that's within the ballpark of what we would consider, then we would then take the steps and go through the process of the due diligence and whatnot, and kind of crossing the T's and dotting the I's and whatnot. But I think that was kind of the process. Is if we see the offer and the LOI and it's not to our standards, we say no, thank you, and we keep going and we keep growing, and that sort of thing. That was kind of the thought process. It just so happened that the offer was sufficient based on kind of where we were at, that it made sense for us.
Yeah, and to be fair, you already touched on it. Like you were looking at this as an opportunity for you to scale as well. Like you looked at this not just as the payout. You kind of included it in the factors of consideration if you're going to sell. what is this doing for us to continue to fulfill our purpose, for us to continue to grow that kind of impact. So you can kind of look at it as, instead of going out and looking for investors, this one was the one, and it gave you that opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's, we didn't have any other offers from companies that would have offered us the opportunity to expand in the States if they were to acquire us. So this one made perfect sense from that perspective.
And then what about the expanding out east? Because earlier you had mentioned, when you were looking at that, there were bigger competitors out east. That would have been a consideration. You would have had to look at sales differently. You had to have people on the ground. It wasn't just a matter of that technology, as you indicated. Was all of that proven out with the expansion once Zonda took over? That expansion out east, was it as tough, or would it have been as tough as you kind of predicted?
Yeah, so I would say we're probably about 3 years into our Eastern expansion, and if I'm being kind of transparent about it, it's been there's been positives for sure, but it's not like a slam dunk from the perspective of product offerings. We currently have three providers of new home data in that market, potentially a fourth, and I think that people are starting to kind of recognize our firm. They're starting to kind of get awareness of us. We're putting on some great events. We hired a really kind of phenomenal team. We have a VP advisory and VP of market research in that company with over a combined 50 years of experience. So we've done all the right things. We've hired a team out there. We've done all the right things to grow and get exposure out there, and we are starting to see traction. But it's year 4. So
Right.
it's something that so it's something that
Yeah.
takes time.
Yeah.
It's something where you would, in hindsight, if we were to do that ourselves, we would have to have committed to losing a considerable amount of money for 3 years, and then you're in the black and you're starting to grow in year 4 or 5. So it was pretty much on point with what our expectations were for growth, and kind of what we found. And I don't know if it's like through books or you hear about you want to be first and second in every product and market was the GE mantra, but it's true. I can tell you that in business is that from the real estate data, there's companies that like we like one or two products. If you're number 3, you're going to have a really tough time in that market.
Right.
So I think that's kind of where we want to get in is just continue to peck away and get into the top 2 in that market. And I think it's starting to happen, and good things are starting to happen, but it's not overnight. It's 3 to 4 years of work that goes into it.
Yeah. Validating though, like the fact that it kind of played out the way you thought it would. And not to say that had the acquisition not happened that you wouldn't have pursued it, but at least kind of knowing that you had the right assumptions in place and you would have had the right expectations, that and that's how it played out. Kind of cool. What's the strategy now? What's next for expansion into the States at some point, getting Eastern Canada kind of into that top 1-2? Is that are you still kind of with the same partner and still kind of have generally the same team?
Yeah, so my business partner has moved on to a senior management position at one of the larger residential developers in
Okay.
BC, Anthem Properties. So he's doing some good things over at the folks over there. But in terms of the team, the core kind of people with the team who are with me are still here. Yeah, we're still continuing to focus on growing in Eastern Canada. We do have plans to enter into the States in the near future. And then we're continually kind of getting out to the market to get feedback on where we're looking to grow and add more services and product offerings. So we're continually looking to improve the product through more frequent updates, through adding more data points. And the market's pretty dynamic and it's evolving. So those are kind of the core considerations we're going to do within the next year to 2 years. Yeah, we have potential more specific items. We haven't got it fully approved yet. So
Right.
still
Don't
still
share
looking to
those.
grow where we can. Yeah, and you know
Yeah.
what? Like it's super interesting right now in the real estate space, right? Because when I started in real estate, and then we became a real estate data firm. we didn't really have a whole lot of people who were interested in us. The core challenge was actually just like trying to get people to adopt using data to like help them make decisions. That was like the core challenge 15 years ago.
Right.
Was like we didn't have a whole lot of clients, and we're like, hey, you guys should use this. This is going to be really helpful. This is how
Stop
you can
making
show.
decisions based on your gut.
Totally. You could do this with it. Look at this area. This is where we know this is going on, and this is how you can do that. And they're like, wow, okay, cool. And so it's like, man, maybe I'll think about it. Come back to me in a year. Like I think I'd like rather just do what I used to do and talk to my broker and call them up and have lunch with them and that kind of thing. Right. So it's really, the big challenge 15 years ago was just getting that adoption, like getting people into that product. You fast forward to today, it's where, you got the product curve where we're not in the adoption phase. Like everyone, like in our space, we have so many people who like that's just second nature. Like, of course we're going to use this type of product. Of course we're going to use this to do this. And there's just more kind of entrance into our space. So it's really a totally different landscape in terms of we're at the more mature phase of what we are. And so you have to kind of continue to iterate and show like, okay, let's iterate the product and platform to different ways because the space is getting more competitive. So it's a different issues that we have today that we didn't have before. Was different problems. Yeah, I mean, going back to kind of the theme of your podcast, business is effing hard. Different types of hard. Right now is the phase one was just getting people like knowing like you're adopting your product, right? And we do not have that problem now. It's about like how do you grow and differentiate and continue to service, right? So
Yeah, yeah. On that kind of the evolution piece, I mean, it used to be that people trying to convince them to use data, and now the question is who has more data, who has more data points, where's that differentiation on data points, and now everything is about data. It's no longer a matter of convincing somebody to use data. It's do you have enough of it? Um, uh, what about the difference now moving away from kind of that business ownership piece and back into more of an employee piece? Do you miss the days of the business decisions and kind of the laying awake at night and the stress of layoffs and people quitting and HR issues? I'm kind of, I'm making it sound negative, but those are the things that give you that autonomy as a business owner, and that courageousness and kind of the challenges that come with that.
yeah, so I mean, I would respond to that and saying like my assessment of it is that there's trade offs between two, being on the entrepreneur side and being on the employment side. Making those decisions, you do get to really remove a lot of the red tape component of things. You can really get to making decisions. You can fail fast, that sort of thing. But then on the flip side is that you do have to live with any type of mistake that that
Yep.
you do, and
Yep.
you have to live with that. So there's totally trade offs for sure, and that sort of thing. But I think I still think that there's listening to another podcaster. I think his name is Bet David, Patrick Bet David. He had a book, and his component of it was that he was a very entrepreneurial guy, and his position on the matter, which I tend to agree with, is that like you can still have entrepreneurial type people in organizations that are employees, so long that you provide the structure
100%.
for them.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he described it as intrapreneurs. And so you say, look, like you're an entrepreneurial type of person. We've identified you. You're ambitious. We're going to give you ownership of this component of this, and you get the free reign to make these decisions on this component of it. And then as you grow and you kind of, there's some success with that, then they can grow up the company, and it kind of checks off as many boxes as possible. If the organization is reluctant to have those entrepreneurial type situations, then naturally over time, entrepreneurs and people with entrepreneurial spirit will tend to leave those organizations. So I think there is a case for all types of
Good point.
situations that can
Yeah.
happen. But it depends. It depends on the situation and how it presents itself. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I think with running a business, one of the benefits that allowed me to not lose sleep at night for the most part was just the business model and the fact that we weren't in debt and we didn't have any kind of
Yeah.
crazy components of it. Like, we, once we got what we called off the treadmill, where we were kind of looking to get the next work, getting into a reoccurring revenue model. And as long as you kind of worked your best every day and kind of put your best foot forward on putting the best product together, and you're fair on pricing, and you continue to grow your reoccurring revenue, we had like a really good peace of mind with the business. Like, obviously you would have challenges with staff members leaving, or critical people leaving, or situations that came about which would be uncomfortable and that sort of thing. But ultimately, I guess I don't really know. I was very lucky to not have that whole like, am I going to have to do anything crazy and that kind of thing. And with annual subscriptions during COVID, like, that was kind of the more interesting one, is that we didn't have the same type of crazy situation in terms of having to shut the lights off or anything like that, because of the way the business was structured and the model that we
Right.
created. We were so lucky and fortunate. So from that perspective, like, we just got really lucky in terms of the business decision and what we did, and that kind of thing.
There is an element of luck in all of it, isn't there? Like again, going back to kind of you can read stories about some of the successful businesses, but a book, I don't know if I've said it on this podcast before, but it's called $1 Billion Lessons, and it came out right at the recession, 2008, I think it was published, and just talks about kind of the bigger $1 billion businesses that either went under or made some really bad decisions. But again, so much of it, like if something else had happened, they might have just continued to be on growth paths. I mean, some of the biggest companies in the world, Nvidia is now value a market cap of 3.5 trillion, and there were 3 or 4 times along its journey that it by all accounts it should have gone bankrupt, and now it's one of the biggest companies in the world.
Luck that goes into it. I mean, you even just look at, trying to think of an example that would compare to that in terms of just pure fortune. You look at a company like Facebook. Not to say that, not from the perspective of it going under, but just like, they literally created a product out of a dorm room through the Harvard Facebook portal or whatever it was called, and it literally caught on and became an addictive product to university somethings, and then on to the rest of the world throughout the course of like 3 years. And it just grew exponentially. I think the book they made up of that was called Accidental Billionaires, because it wasn't like, okay, we're going to build this $1 billion product. It just kind of came about that way, that this product was so addictive. And like, it was a software platform that people contributed their own content into, so they didn't have to even pay people to put any content into. The people themselves were willingly putting in this content. Like, talk about some of the best business models of all time, and fortune, right, for that, right, to
Yeah,
happen. There's a lot of
yeah,
successful people in there, but to get to that $1 trillion level, I think there's a combination of success, hard work, and luck in terms of the timing and the product and everything like that. So
yeah.
yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. And then how many of these companies start out as one thing and then evolve, and yours is kind of a journey like that, right? Like you get inspired by this need based on what you're seeing from a job perspective. Partner is out there kind of building a business, you kind of connect on value add to that business model, and then as the technology changes and the appetite for data changes, all of a sudden that kind of changes and morphs into what you're providing, and you provide that reoccurring revenue kind of stream with subscription base, and all of that just evolves if you keep your eyes out for it and you allow yourself to be nimble.
100%. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of great businesses in the tech side have just really been, over the past 15 years, or maybe even a little bit longer than that, have been a combination of expertise and software and bringing that together. I just know a couple of examples of businesses locally where I live, where you have a company where you have a specific expert in a given field, and they want to accomplish something, but they don't feel like whatever is available is sufficient to
Right.
service what they're doing. And so
Exactly.
they combine their skill sets
Yep.
with the technology person, and they will do that. So an example that I can think of right at the top of my head is Jane Software, which is founded by a local, I think it was a health technician or physio who didn't have a great
Yeah.
software platform to kind of book appointments, do
Yeah.
that, and now
I've read
you're
about
talking.
this.
Yeah, so they're a local
Yeah.
company, just based from pretty humble beginnings, and now you fast forward to today, you've got a couple billion, $1 billion plus company because they've kind of curated the best in class product that can tailor to, health professionals, physio professionals using kind of technology and tools. Clio, that's another local example of a
Yeah.
legal software platform where you're
For
combining legal
lawyers. Yeah.
expertise and,
Yeah.
and software. So
That's
a
right.
lot of it over the past 15 years has been, and kind of similar to my case, is combining expertise in market research and data and what customers would want in an online platform and software. But that's kind of happening all across industry. It's been happening for the past 15 plus years. And then the next step is just combining algorithms and the technology that we have to even make it even more kind of super powered. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I think everybody's excited, nervous, curious about what that impact is going to be for sure. John, I've taken enough of your time. I really appreciate you sitting down with me. Um, it's so awesome to hear these stories, but when people are just willing to open up and just be honest about the journey, and I think obviously many lessons for folks listening to this episode, whether they're starting out or established or looking at scale or looking at acquisition, all the considerations that they can kind of make along the way. So thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
yeah, thanks for having me, Trevor. Really appreciate it as well. Anytime.
Awesome. Thank you for listening to this episode of Business is Fucking Hard. Please remember that this show is meant to create community and share ideas in the business world. For advice specific to your business, talk to an expert in your industry. Please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on Instagram and LinkedIn and invite others to do the same. This episode was hosted by me, Trevor Koot, and produced and edited by Alex Harris. Thanks for tuning in, and talk to you next time.